everybody, welcome to episode 64 of Life and Life Only. I haven't got a specific title for this episode as I'm recording it now, but this is going to be my fourth and probably final episode on Axel Rudakubana and the knife attacks, which is probably a generous phrase really, because it was much more than that he perpetrated in Southport in the north of England in July 2024. The previous episodes are episodes 57 and then the last two episodes of the show, 62 and 63. The last two episodes focused quite a lot on the media coverage of Axel Rudakubana. There are a couple of points to be made along the way regarding that coverage, but this is really going to be looking at the evidence that's been uncovered by the Southport Inquiry, the first phase of which has just finished a few days ago as I'm recording this. I did get a message after the last show criticising me for appearing to side with a monster, and I did take that on board. I have changed my views slightly, and let me make it clear that's not going to be more sympathetic with a killer. It's gone the other way, but I'll explain all that as we go. But really, as I said in the other episodes, which I probably would listen to first if you're interested in the case, it's not absolutely essential to do that. You could get a cursory knowledge of the case just by looking online at the bare facts of it. But really, I was just trying to offer something other than blind hatred and calling him evil and a monster. And as they used to say in the old days, lock him up and throw away the key. It was that sort of idea in most videos. I'm just trying to make some attempt to understand, although, to be honest, after I read everything that I've accumulated here in terms of information, I think the question of why is still very murky. I think we get a few clues, so we'll see what happens along the way. I've got together here a ridiculous amount of notes, to be honest. I mean, a lot of it really is directly copied from the updates by the Liverpool Echo and the BBC, daily updates of the inquiry. I've tried to pare it down. I was going to try and go through every single facet of it, but it's just impossible. There was just too much. It was 9 weeks, 4 days a week. Lots of information every day. Now, on the media angle, I have noticed that since the inquiry started, and then as I said, it's just finished, there have been none of these prison stories about Axel, about how he's bribing the guards to behave and he's hunting his next victim in prison, all these stories that I basically dismantled in the last couple of episodes. You know, it's almost as if they don't need any of those stories because they've got daily stories about it anyway. It's almost as if there's a quota that needs to be filled, or he's considered newsworthy enough to have a certain amount of stories. So you need a daily or weekly story about him. But since the inquiry's gone on, there's no need to basically, in my view, make up stories about what he's been doing in prison. I covered in the last episode the alleged boiling water attack, which has never been confirmed. And I'm pretty much on the fence about whether he actually did that, but some of the whole framing of it, that he's got some cushy life, I already talked about that in the last shows. One thing that has been, hesitate to use the word interesting, horrifying of course, was the attack on the train in Cambridgeshire, which was, I think it was early November. I'm recording this on the 10th, which certainly had Axel vibes, you might call it. I hope that's not too flippant, in various ways. I mean, it was a loner. He was black, no ideology, sudden terror attack involving a knife. I don't know if he was silent during the attack as Axel was. He was tasered by the police, and in fact he was shouting for the police to kill him as he was being apprehended and tasered. So that was quite chilling. I don't know whether it will come out that he was, again, picking my words carefully, I'm going to say inspired, but in heavy inverted commas, by the Southport attacks to do that. I'm actually quite surprised there haven't been more copycat attacks, to be honest. But yeah, that was absolutely horrifying as well. I do want to get just graphic for 1 second, but it's actually regarding a film. I just rewatched the film Shallow Grave, which was directed by Danny Boyle and co-starring Ewan McGregor. It was basically the film that those two made before Trainspotting. And there's a scene where, it happens to a couple of characters, but Ewan McGregor's character is stabbed, I think, either in the chest or in the arm, I can't remember. And Ewan McGregor acts it very well. The agony on his face just from one knife wound, not in the worst place, let's say, to be stabbed, I'm not going to go through any of the details, let me assure you, of Axel Rudakubana's attack, because we already covered that. But that kind of brought home how terribly painful and also terrifying it is. I mean, a gun is one thing. If somebody shoots you, obviously it's terrible, but it's fairly quick. There's something very visceral about a knife, possibly because knives are things that we use every day in innocuous ways. Anyway, let's not talk about that anymore. I'm going to pick up the inquiry where we left off, which was around the end of September. So I'm going to try and make it as concise as possible. And certainly there is lots of very eye-opening information. In case you don't know about the inquiry itself, I'll just read. This is from the Liverpool Echo. The Southport Inquiry has been set up to establish the circumstances surrounding the attack and the events leading up to it. It will examine an overall timeline of the perpetrator's history and interactions with various public bodies, including criminal justice, education, social care and healthcare, as well as decision-making and information sharing by local services and agencies. Now, while I've been following these updates in the last 9 weeks, there have been headlines, obviously, and of course they are just going to be quick highlights of each day. They've mostly been faithful to the information that I've heard, but just every now and again you get a little bit of dishonesty. So, for example, one of the people from the care agencies who had some interactions with Axel, they called him sinister, and then they said he was one of the most unusual kids they'd ever dealt with. And a newspaper headline turned sinister plus most unusual into most sinister. Now, I understand media, I've done many episodes really, 2 specifically on it, the last 2 episodes, but we've touched on this many times on this podcast and when I've done guest appearances on other shows. It's really the demands of media and the competition aspect that means that you get quite dishonest headlines like these. Most of the articles seem to be using as a visual the artist's drawing of Axel in court, looking defiant and sour-faced. They seem to have replaced the mugshot. Perhaps they thought people had got tired of seeing that mugshot, so they've moved to another one. But obviously, they're not going to use any image that would garner any idea that he's afraid or anything like that. He has to look defiant or evil at all times. There's been a woke angle to some of the reporting in the last few weeks, perhaps because he's black teenager they were dealing with. Maybe they wanted to play down how dangerous he was because they were afraid of being tagged as racist or treating him unfairly because he was black. I do know that the word sinister was removed from one of the reports on him. Not talking about a newspaper report, I mean from one of the social services. I talked in the last couple of shows about this very strange and slightly suspicious arrest video. Rather than me going through it all again, because I've got so much to cover here, it was covered in the last couple of episodes, the fact that the police made a point of recording a video of him being arrested and there was absolutely no blood, even though he's supposed to have carried out about 250 stab wounds. There's no noise, no paramedics, ambulance sirens, anything like that. I've already covered all that, but the other thing is that in the inquiry, the officers testified that quite naturally after they tasered him, they ordered him to drop the knife, which he did very quickly. They apprehended him, tasered him, and then handcuffed him. So I wonder why they then re-handcuff him 15 minutes later and put it on video. I'm not trying to imply there was a sinister reason. I feel like I've already gone through this, but it seemed to be a bit for show, like they took the cuffs off him and they wanted everyone to see that they'd handcuffed him. But maybe, there could be a good reason for that. That maybe it's almost like a white lie, if you like. It's to reassure the public that this guy was apprehended, this very, very dangerous individual. Anyway, when we left the inquiry, the survivors and the victims' families had spoken, and really that was an extension of what we had already heard, these absolutely horrendous attacks and horrendous injuries. Some of the things I won't be covering, for example, a Twitter, I still call it Twitter, ex-executive was questioned, as were the companies that delivered the weapons to Axel. He was referred to throughout the inquiry as AR. I guess it was just easier than saying Rudakubana every time, and if they'd called him Axel, that might have sounded a bit too personal, a bit too friendly perhaps. But I'm going to be referring to him as Axel. We're going to be jumping around a lot in terms of time because the witnesses at the inquiry weren't arranged to give a perfect timeline. They were called in groups and looking at different aspects of what took place in a period which is almost exactly 5 years. The disintegration, really, of the person that he was, this quite normal 12-year-old who'd been in a BBC Children in Need video, from about summer 2019, roughly, to obviously the attack in July 2024. It's a 5-year period. I wouldn't say his behaviour gradually disintegrated, certainly in terms of the wider world. I think because his world really for most of that 5 years was contained inside his own home. We'll get to it later, quite an incredible stat about how much time he actually spent in his house. I guess what was building up was the anger and the tension, and as we know, tension always needs a release. And unfortunately in this case it was a horrific release. Now, one of the people that was called, I'm wondering what words to use. Do I call them witnesses? I guess they're giving testimonies, even though, this is not a criminal inquiry. Or it's an inquiry about a criminal event, which is not quite the same thing, but I will use the word testimony. Knife Warehouse Managing Director Joseph Wheeler. In the inquiry notes, it says, "We turn to the driving licence used by Axel to make the order of a machete. We hear it was genuine, belonging to a black gentleman called Samuel, born in 1961 and living in Uxbridge. Axel's home address was 200 miles away from Uxbridge. When asked if that rang any alarm bells, Mr. Wheeler said, 'I can't remember because it was 2 years ago, but I didn't spot anything or don't remember anything at the time.' Mr. Wheeler says they have started this year to ask for proof of address by sending in utility bills or council tax documents. Asked if he wondered why a man in his 60s was ordering an agricultural knife to banks in Lancashire, Mr. Wheeler says, 'No, I didn't. Not at the time.' He confirms he should have thought about it at the time. We're shown the packaging used by Knife Warehouse to deliver the weapon to Axel. There's a red circular warning on the inside of the packaging which says extremely sharp, case for storage only. Mr. Moss, one of the chairs of the inquiry who's doing the questioning, says the black packaging doesn't seem particularly stylised for the lawful, legitimate agricultural use, does it? Now, we also know for sure that Alphonse, who's Axel's father, accepted at least one parcel for his son. We'll get to all that later with some of the testimony towards the end of the inquiry, or this phase of the inquiry. A pattern that does seem to have emerged with things like delivering to people's houses. It's such a normal and everyday thing now, Amazon packages or eBay or whatever it is, that I think generally people just don't really tend to question things. So the delivery guy is just doing his job. The managing director of that company really should have paid more attention, I think, but you'll see that's kind of a recurring pattern. People just letting things happen. They also spoke to the taxi company who had almost taken his fare on July the 22nd. Just in case you don't know, a week before the attack, he booked a taxi, he was sitting in the taxi to go to his old school, carrying a knife. His father, Alphonse, pleaded with the taxi driver not to take him. We have video of this, I think it was a doorbell cam, of Axel quite stroppily shutting the taxi door and going back in the house. Now, the taxi driver on the 29th, Mr. Gary Poland, we will hear from him. Quite amazing testimony. He was freelance, but he took jobs from a taxi company. The inquiry also looked at the heroic actions of some of the people that helped on the day itself, including Leanne and Heidi, who were running the dance class, Taylor Swift dance class. This was covered in the last episode. Leanne Lucas, who ran the class, was not fit to give evidence at the inquiry and has been unable to work since the attack. Now, these inquiry updates, there were days and days of the various social services and mental health workers talking about the risk assessments, or lack of. In short, there was a lot of red tape and lack of coordination, and a slant towards seeing Axel as vulnerable more than dangerous. And we'll have a bit more of that in a while. The various schools that Axel was at, including the one which wasn't a special school, where he was in normal mainstream education, and fairly normal, as we said, until the age of about 12, 13. The Range, which was the school he went to, denied that there was a culture of bullying and gang violence. There was also testimony of the interactions between Axel and his parents and the special schools he attended and then stopped attending. That was partly down to COVID, and it seems like after a while he just stopped engaging with them almost completely. Now, one example of this, a call was made on March the 21st, 2023, so just under a year and a half before the attack, made by Cheryl Smith, who was involved in safeguarding at Pressfield High School. This is one of the special schools. The school had not seen Axel since May the 25th, the previous year, so around 10 months previously, while CAMS, that was one of the social services that we covered in the last show, had not seen him since January 2023. Cheryl Smith told one of her colleagues, every time we try to go over to the house, his mum or dad will come and say, because of his mental health needs, we can't see him. A transcript of the call is shown to the inquiry. Mr. Corrie, that must be the colleague, takes Ms. Smith through a strict questionnaire asking about the immediate risk and then if Axel has mental health needs. Mr. Corrie is then told a crime is not occurring, and he says there's no imminent risk of harm because we don't know anything's happening just now. And this is a key part of this. He hadn't committed a crime. He had actually committed a crime, but it hadn't been treated as such. It's the hockey stick attack, which will come up again, that I've talked about a few times already. The other thing, looking at him again as more like a vulnerable, almost as a patient, really, because of his autism and his neurodivergence, as it's now called. He clearly wasn't seen as enough of a threat. And that's not because he's a bad people. It might be because of the system. The system, as I said, slants towards trying to protect youngsters. We hear the incident did not meet the threshold for attendance and the police did not attend. Mr. Corrie says, quote, the assessment of harm or threat in a policing sense was assessed as none because there was no harm or threat identified. Now, just to be clear, he carried out the hockey stick attack where he went back to his old school. That was at the end of 2019. He ran away in early 2022 and was found on a bus with a knife. Now, apart from that, outside the home, he hadn't actually done anything that could be considered worrying or questionable, apart from the things he actually said. We know that he'd carried a knife to school. This was in the school year that started September 2019. Now, Mr. Corrie accepts in the absence of information there would have been a benefit of a professional being able to see the child, but it wouldn't be a police officer. Now, this is a key phrase. An email between Ms. Smith and Pressfield's deputy head teacher, Lucy McLaughlin. Ms. Smith says the threshold is not met for a police welfare call, with the deputy head responding, wow, okay, so still no eyes on. And this is a key phrase. Ms. Smith adds, the red tape is frightening. Now let's go back to that hockey stick attack. So he went back to his old school. Axel had been arrested, so he had been arrested, in fact, by PC Dodd and PC Clark, who had been allocated to the 999 call. He was found to have struck the pupil 3 times with a hockey stick. Now, there was also some suggestion that he may have sharpened the hockey stick to obviously do more damage. The inquiry hears the pupil said Axel had no reason to attack him. He was arrested on suspicion of assault, occasioning actual bodily harm, possession of a bladed article on school property, and for possession of an offensive weapon. DC Hughes says her role was to review the evidence and then interview Axel. Before the interview, she was emailed by PC Harrison of Lancashire Constabulary, who notified her of Axel's history of carrying knives, the involvement of social services, and that he'd previously talked about guns and beheadings. PC Harrison led a search of Axel's home, along with PC Dodd and PC Clark. A number of items were seized, including a laptop, a PlayStation 4 and 2 portable hard drives. His black iPhone was also seized. The devices were searched, but nothing of relevance was found. Axel told Stephanie Halloran, who was carrying out a mental health assessment, that he would have used the knife if the hockey stick did not work. He said he was clear on revenge and would have killed the student if he was not in assembly. So, I mean, that is pretty damning. He also told Miss Halloran that he liked the student he attacked instead and had no problems with him. So he's saying he would have killed the student that he originally targeted. And that was going to be a revenge attack. That wasn't going to be a random attack. But the thing which is obviously very worrying and frightening about this is that when the person wasn't available that he actually wanted to attack, he decided to just randomly attack. And if you think about it, that's exactly what he decided in July 2024. He was going to go back to the range, not sure who he was going to target there. It looked like he was going to carry out a mass stabbing, but instead when he couldn't do that, then he targeted the Taylor Swift class. He also told Ms. Halloran that he liked the student he attacked instead and had no problems with him. It was deemed that Axel had a lack of empathy and remorse and was a medium risk to others. Remember that, because that's going to come up again. DC Hughes interviewed Axel under caution on December 12th. This is 2019 still. He gave a pre-prepared statement and alleged he was being bullied. He added he'd got to school and saw someone else and admitted striking them because I couldn't find my target. He accepted having the knife but added, I didn't take it out. The teacher has mistaken my words when he says I told him I was there to kill my target. I just meant I was going to assault him because he used to bully me. Okay, so now he's claiming that he didn't say he was going to kill them. Mr. Goss, that's the inquiry chair, asks if Axel behaved inappropriately. DC Hughes said yes a number of times. He just kept laughing at some of the questions. I can't recall which questions now, but he was challenged as to why he was laughing. The detective adds Axel's mother did not challenge his behaviour. DC Hughes made an entry onto the investigation log on December the 16th after Axel's mother told her about a list which contained the names of 3 children he wished to target. The officer says she was never provided with a list and it had not been found on him or during the house search. Now, there was some suggestion that he'd written the names on the hockey stick, but that's not mentioned here. Now, let's go forward to when he went missing, as I just mentioned before, early 2022. The officer who found him, PC Fairclough of Lancashire Constabulary, and spoke to his parents, said, his mother had told me he did not like change. He was due to meet 2 new teachers. I thought at the time he had possibly just left the house in a bit of fear to get away for a couple of hours. Now, as we'll see, the mother is definitely trying to protect her son, and you can't blame her for that per se, but the level of protection perhaps does get very extreme. We'll get to all that, but yes, we know that he was autistic and he was, I think as she said, about to go to a new school, have a new teacher perhaps. I think we have to be clear that he did obviously suffer from severe anxiety. So he was a vulnerable person. He was vulnerable and dangerous at the same time. But as I'm saying, they slanted more towards the vulnerability than the danger, I would say, but with good intentions. PC Fairclough also referenced the teenager's sertraline medication. The officer confirms he read the incident log about Axel attending the range armed with a knife. His mother said she believed her son did this because he'd been bullied. She then disclosed he might be in possession of the knife after she noticed one was missing. The officer said the mother did not disclose that her son had criminal convictions because of the assault, and he only learnt this as he completed his report. When he went missing, he was eventually found on a bus, refusing to pay, which again was something he did on the day of the attack. Refused to pay the taxi. We turn to the incident on the bus. A call came into the force control room from a coach driver who reported a young black male that got onto the bus and, quote, began to get stroppy. Now, if you remember from, I think it was the first of the media episodes I did, I played an audio of a woman who was in court at his sentencing in January this year, and she described his behaviour as stroppy. PC Fairclough and colleague PC Rhodes went to investigate in separate vehicles. Asked where Axel was when he arrived, PC Fairclough said he was sat at the back of the bus. PC Rhodes was in front of him and engaging the teenager. He seemed calm and compliant. He was sat in a slouched position, but he was engaging with PC Rhodes. PC Fairclough says, we asked him to get off the bus. We weren't sure what his demeanour was going to be like, and if we did end up having to fight with him, we didn't want to do that in an enclosed space such as a bus. The officer says Axel was very calm and got off the bus. He was then asked if he had anything he shouldn't have. That's when the knife was produced from his pants pocket. That's pants as in trousers. It was a kitchen knife with a dark-coloured handle with a short, non-serrated blade. Axel handed over the knife as soon as he was asked, the inquiry hears, which is what he did again on July 29th. Obviously, at that time he was being apprehended by 3 quite powerful policemen who weren't scared of him. But notice that when he's confronted, he does comply pretty easily. Now, Mr. Moss, the questioner, says, looking back, even with the information that you had at the time, would you now accept that although you were doing your best, you ought to have arrested him at this point? The officer says yes. He's also asked about the decision not to detain him under the Mental Health Act. PC Fairclough says the key wording is immediate, so we would have to be in immediate harm to himself or the wider public. He had been missing for several hours at this point. He had not harmed himself. He'd come into contact with members of the public. Nobody had come to any harm. So I just didn't think there was an immediate risk at any time. so I couldn't justify detaining him under Section 136. That's obviously related to Mental Health Act. The officer adds the police are always encouraged to take someone to a place of safety rather than detain them. Now, I would say that is a legitimate point. I mean, he was in public, he had a knife. If he was in immediate danger at that point, why didn't he attack anybody? Why was he just riding in a bus surrounded by the public with a knife, not doing anything, basically? So I think that is a legitimate point. We turn to the 10-minute journey back to Axel's home. Both PC Fairclough and PC Rhodes were in the car. We hear at some point Axel was asked why he had a knife. PC Fairclough said something similar to, "I want to stab people." We hear that Axel was calm, and the officer recalls looking in the rear-view mirror and seeing him smiling. So again, we got these inappropriate responses, which is a sign of social discomfort. But I would also say that when I did the episodes on emotional intelligence a few years ago, one of the things about it is that sometimes children can in some way be quite nice, but if there's something wrong in their brain, something quite seriously wrong, then they can have completely inappropriate reactions, and they can also be missing things such as empathy and remorse. It may be that they're literally not capable of it. And I think perhaps this is one of the reasons why I don't generally express hatred towards particularly young people who've done crimes like this. It's not quite comparable, but people in England of a certain age will know about the Jamie Bolger case in the early 90s. If you listen to the two perpetrators, who were both about the age of 10, the victim was 2 and the children were 9, 10, something like that. When you listen to them, it's quite amazing to hear what they sound like, because they do sound on one level just like children, but they happen to be children who've carried out murder. And so what I get with Axel is that because he seemed to come from a fairly decent family, it didn't seem like there was any abuse in the house before all the trouble started. He would have some capacity for socialising, but there seems to be just something gone wrong in his brain. It's not excusing it, but it might be some explanation. PC Fairclough says Axel did not appear remorseful and gave a bizarre account of why he wanted to stab people. And we have heard already that apparently he wanted his phone to be seized because there were embarrassing videos on his social media account that he couldn't get rid of. And he was told that if he committed an offence, they would seize his phone. It was something very, very strange like that. Axel made repeated references to the videos on Instagram and TikTok during the short journey back to his house. He also told the officers, "I've also thought about poisoning people," and said again he wanted his phone seized. Both parents were present when they arrived at the house, and the officers told them about the knife possession and the comments about wanting to stab someone. Asked how the parents reacted, PC Fairclough says they appeared stressed, I think. I think it was a mother who claimed she was crying out for extra support and she felt it was falling on deaf ears. I don't think they were shocked about the knife because it was obviously themselves who had informed me of that earlier in the day. But I think the comment about stabbing did shock them. Both parents seemed receptive to the concerns, and he returned the knife to Axel's mother. Axel's mother tried to return the knife into a knife block, which suggests it had been out with knives accessible in the family home. Now, this is interesting because the family testified, as you'll hear later, that they were hiding knives. Perhaps it's difficult to hide all the knives, I don't know, but certainly a large kitchen knife. It seems like she did put that back in the block fairly calmly. PC Fairclough spoke to Axel's mother in private about the poison comments. He asked her if he'd ever mentioned poison before. His mother, quote, didn't seem shocked, and she then explained he had mentioned poison previously to her. Now, referring back to these TikTok videos, Axel told the officers there was a video on TikTok that he was being bullied for and wanted deleting. He wasn't argumentative in an aggressive way, but confirms he seemed fixated on the issue. Now, this is one general trait of autism, which is being fixed on one specific thing and finding it difficult to get your attention away from this thing. Like I said many times, I'm not an expert on this. I've just done some reading on it. And I think I mentioned in one of the other shows, I used to help my father coach some kids at table tennis. There were a couple of autistic kids, and there were a couple of traits which did seem to chime with some of what we're hearing here. I'm not saying they made comments about violence, I'm not talking about that bit, but just little things like strange reactions to things and fixating on particular things. PC Rhodes says Axel seemed completely unfazed and showed no emotion throughout my interaction. On the day of the attack, of course, he was completely silent. apart from when the police were apprehending him. And even in the police station, apart from these apparent unsolicited comments that he made, he was completely silent. Now, Sergeant Daniel Clark, who was the officer in charge of the PC's Fairclough and Roads, confirms there's a reluctance in policing to arrest and detain children. Asked if the risk to children can, in some circumstances, lead to the risk to others being overlooked, P.S. Clark said yes. The officer also confirms there's a tendency in policing to categorise issues as being either a criminal justice issue or a mental health issue. So clearly with Axel, you've got both of those things going on. He's saying that's the problem, that there's a certain compartmentalisation. I would love to cover all this in more detail, but we just got so much to get through. We now turn to 2 incidents in the home a few months prior to the bus incident, so we are jumping around a bit. The inquiry hears the call was from Axel's parents because the teenager was smashing the house up and throwing things. The behaviour was prompted by a stranger knocking at the door. So there we're seeing evidence of quite severe problems. His problems originally started with isolation and severe anxiety, and I think that carried on. 2.5 hours later, the police called back Axel's mother, who confirmed she did not want the police to attend. An hour after this, PC Williams called, and his mother told him the arrival of the police might upset him further, and they were engaging with other services. So I believe there she did have good intentions. She's trying to protect her son, like I said, and in a way she's trying to protect others, because obviously if he had an outburst, that could affect other people. The officer is asked if the significance of the previous report should have tipped the scales in favour of visiting Axel at home. The reply is, I'm not sure it would, because it was essentially Axel playing up with his parents at home. There was no reference from either of the parents on the log to any link to previous incidents. It appeared to be an incident where he was falling out with his parents at home. And as I said, from the bus incident right to the attack in July last year, everything really is happening in the home. The second incident was on November the 30th, after his parents reported the teenager had become angry and thrown his plate of food, kicked and punched his dad, and jumped on a rented vehicle. The call was graded a priority 2. Police attendance 5 hours later was, quote, well short of the target. However, it would have been informed by the fact the parents called back and said the situation had changed. One of the responding officers, PC Ward, said he had no memory of being aware of Axel's convictions and history with knives. So we're getting, again, more evidence of certain information not being passed between agencies or between police and agencies. Now we turn to Gary Poland, who was the taxi driver on the infamous video, who literally, without realising what exactly he was doing, basically delivered Axel to the dance class. Now, in the last episode, there had been some testimony, maybe a written statement, that he'd heard screams and he was backing his taxi out when girls started running out the building. And I think we covered on the last show that it was a matter of seconds. I mean, maybe it was like 30 seconds, 45 seconds, when children started running out. And he chose to drive away. He claimed to be in shock and fearful, didn't call the police until 12:46, a full hour after the attack. He also took other fares in the meantime. So we're going to get into the details of that. Mr. Poland is an experienced private hire taxi driver, had been doing it for 27 years at the time of the attack. He was self-employed and owned the taxi and took jobs off One Call Taxis, it's a local firm, through a mobile phone app. He didn't have to accept or decline the jobs and could pick which ones he wanted to do. Mr. Poland says he has worked mainly within the Southport area. He adds that since the attack, he has worked reduced hours and only collects customers that he knows because of the psychological impact of that day. We turn to Monday, July the 29th. He took Axel from his home address at 10 Old School Close to 34A Hart Street. Axel used the false name Simon. Mr. Poland confirms there was no way for him to know at the time it was a false name. The inquiry is told the journey was effectively done in silence. And of course, we have this video, not of the whole journey, but basically that's it. I mean, there was no interaction between them apart from confirming the address at the beginning of the taxi ride and then obviously what happened at the end of it. When asked if Axel gave any cause for suspicion during the journey, Mr. Poland said, "Quite a few of our customers are black, and I know he was wearing a face mask, which a lot of them do." Quite a curious comment. "We pick up a lot of care workers that look like that, and I just presumed he was going to pick up his car from Masters next door to where we ended up. So on the video, we see that Mr. Poland actually directs Axel to the wrong place. It's a car repair yard, I think, and there's a spray shop there. As we know from the video, Axel refused to pay. Mr. Poland threatened to call the police. And then we can see that Mr. Poland saw Axel banging on one door of the heart space. He was wondering what was going to happen. Then he walked to the other door and walked straight in, as we've seen. Mr. Poland said he then waited, thinking he might get the money. So he did think perhaps Axel was going into the heart space. Perhaps he thought it was just a weird kid who, instead of saying, "I'll get your money," was just going to go in there, get the money and come back and pay. Mr. Poland says while waiting, he heard 4 or 5 loud bangs and thought they were gunshots at the time. He adds, "I thought someone was shooting. That's when I went into panic mode." Let's be quite realistic about this. If you had been kind of verbally abusing someone who refused to pay a fare, a young kid, let's just be honest that white people are often perhaps more afraid of black teenagers than white teenagers. And that doesn't mean that they're racist. It's just, I think, a reality. So when he heard gunshots, he thought perhaps it's quite feasible that this young kid is going to come back out with a gun and possibly target Mr. Poland because he had abused him. I mean, he didn't call him anything really terrible, but he did call him a couple of names. Mr. Poland says while driving away, he called his friend Julian Medlock, who worked next door. On this video, we can see that Axel, as I said, was directed to the wrong place, first of all. Mr. Poland then stopped on Brompton Road, accepted another fare and drove the passenger to her destination, making a stop en route. He then called Julian Medlock again before calling the one-call taxi's control room to confirm Axel's address. Mr. Poland then went home, discussed the situation with his wife, and then called 999 from home. So here it says 50 minutes. I said earlier an hour, but obviously it's a long time after the attack. Now, what I find quite incredible, this is another media thing. I don't know if I'm being terribly naive here. Okay, I think it's highly unlikely that Axel had a gun. You could see on the video, he obviously had a knife with him. He didn't have a gun, but the fact that these gunshots are they weren't even the headline. Like I say, the newspapers were getting headlines from this inquiry. The headline was something like, "Taxi driver, sorry he drove away," or something like that. It just beggars belief to me that the gunshots are not even mentioned. I mean, they haven't been mentioned since. Now, what were they, we wonder? Someone I was discussing this with said that it could have been the taser, but I looked at some videos of modern tasers, the ones used by the police, and they emit some sound, but they don't sound like loud bangs that you would hear from outside a building. Yes, the front door was open, that's true. But essentially what happened then was that Mr. Poland saw Axel go in the building. He drove away almost straight away, so he would have heard gunshots after, let's say 20 seconds. After about 30 seconds, he sees children running out, possibly some bleeding, or perhaps they were the ones that got away. And he drove away within probably 30 to 45 seconds from when he saw Axel go in the building. So what were these loud bangs? I hope that somebody is at least going to mention them at some point in the future. Now, Mr. Poland made a witness statement to the inquiry. "On reflection of events, I do consider I should have called the police earlier. In hindsight, I wish I had done, and it's something I think about every day, what I should have done and how this is my fault because I drove him there. I should have checked on the welfare of the children and helped. I thought there was a gunman shooting at people, and I believe this to be a person who I had just been shouting at to pay a fare. I did believe I was in danger of being a target. I regret not helping the children. Their screams are harrowing, and I can still hear them when I think back to that day. I cannot imagine what the victims and the families of the victims have been through, and they have my deepest sympathy for what happened that day. Since the incident, I've suffered periods of depression, and I've had to reduce my work hours and will only collect customers who are known to me. There isn't a day that passes when I don't think about that day and the what-ifs. I accept I could have done more. I still believe my actions as a taxi driver were fit and proper. This is not something that happens every day. It's a tragic event that should never have happened. I did what I did based upon fear, shock and panic. These are human emotions which I could not control. Mr. Poland confirms he was in a state of complete mortal terror and shock." Which, okay, is understandable, but then he did take a fare, and apparently quite calmly. I don't know if they've spoken to the lady who was his next fare, but it seems from what he said that he was speaking quite calmly. But of course, I'm not implying that he had any sinister motives. I think he was I think it's just human frailty, basically. He did make an interesting comment. If I thought he had a knife, I probably would have got out and disarmed him. We did get quite a lot of this during the inquiry, of people saying, if I'd just known this, then I would have done this. And Mr. Poland said if he'd known about the incident a week earlier, which did involve the same taxi company, if I'd heard about that, I wouldn't have picked him up. Mr. Poland says, I just remember seeing his face. I can't sleep at night. I shut my eyes, I see his face. He's just there all the time in my head. We've already heard that he said he thought Axel was going into the building to get his money. And when he delivered him to this spray shop, he thought he was going to pick up his car. And then they go through some of the things about the things that we've already seen in the video. I just want to quickly comment on one thing on the video there. Something I didn't mention when I was talking about the previous episodes is that when you see Axel going down the street, it was actually before he got in the taxi. I think there's some footage of him at a bus stop, then footage of him walking down the street. You see that he has his head bowed very far forward. Now, that's very clear in body language circles to mean that it's called leading with your head, and it means that somebody who is very much stuck in their thoughts or stuck in their head. In fact, when I see videos of myself from a few years ago, I'm very much like this as well, because I just used to be completely almost controlled by the thoughts in my head, really. Not saying they were bad thoughts, I'm just saying that when you're too much like that, it's not a good thing. You have to almost give your brain some air, give your mind some air sometimes. Just going back to this phone call that Mr. Poland made to his friend, he says, I think he shot some people. So again, he's talking about hearing gunshots and screams. Mr. Moss, of the inquiry, says, in terms of the severity of what you heard, it stands to reason you would have realised immediately this was a very serious incident. Mr. Poland says, oh yes, and adds he believed Axel had a loaded gun and had used it. Mr. Poland recalls a mass of children aged approximately 6 or 7 stumbling and running in a panicked hurry out of 34A Hart Street. They were screaming. Mr. Moss says, do you accept that as you were driving away, children were fleeing, they were alongside your car? Mr. Poland says, that's correct. And as you drove further down the driveway, you can clearly be seen in the rear-facing dash cam, looking in your rear-view camera. Mr. Poland confirms again this is correct. He adds he didn't see any injuries, but heard the gunshots and was presuming something had gone on. So perhaps the children that ran out weren't injured, but Leanne Lucas certainly was injured. She ran out, was about 45 seconds after the attack started, and amazingly managed to call 999 and shepherd children out of there despite having maybe 5 or 6 stab wounds. Absolutely incredible. And there's a bit more about this phone call, and it's implied that Mr. Poland's talking to his friend and saying, what could have happened to me? I think the inquiry chairman at times is quite aggressive. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be. You need to press people to get the facts from them. But there's one bit, Mr. Moss says the call to Mr. Medlock could have been a sort of guess what's just happened to me call. Mr. Poland says this is unfair. At any time during this call, did you say anything about these young girls or their welfare? Mr. Poland, I don't think so. I really don't know. He accepts he did not call Mr. Medlock back to ask how the girls were or if someone had called 999. So there's more of this, and Mr. Moss does press him quite a bit. But I think we get the point there. He acted out of shock. He didn't really act appropriately, I would say, but perhaps it's more understandable if you believe him that he thought Axel had a gun and might well come out, or probably had already used it on children and was perhaps going to come out and use it on him. We hear that while driving his next fare, Mr. Poland passed a police car with its blue lights and sirens on. The passenger said, I wonder what that was. Mr. Poland responded, he's in a rush, isn't he? So it's quite strange behaviour, but when there's extreme shock and fear, perhaps that is in some way understandable. Apparently Mr. Poland called Mr. Medlock again. Mr. Medlock told him he stabbed about 15 kids. One's dead. Kids all over the show. I know police will want to know where you picked him up from. Mr. Poland tells the inquiry, I think I was lucky that with him being sat behind me, me not knowing he had a knife, he could have just got me like that, but he didn't, did he? Now, the call handler at One Call Taxis made a comment, which I won't put it here, but it's sort of a bit inappropriate. There is a sort of gallows humour that does kick in when terrible events happen. So, yes, he made a 20-minute phone call to the police, so he must have given them quite a lot of details there. Right, Towards the end of the inquiry, I was following it, but there was a lot of repetitive testimony and analysis. And it was important, yes, but it wasn't particularly interesting to read. But in the last 2.5 days, we finally got the testimony of 3 people who could perhaps give us the best account of what was going on with Axel Rudakubana, and that is, of course, his brother Dion, his father Alphonse, and his mother Laetitia. I'm going to refer to them by their first names. Laetitia is referred to with a different surname. I don't know whether she just kept her maiden name, but anyway, I'm going to refer to them as this. So Dion Rudakubana, we knew, had been confined to a wheelchair since the age of 12, and we finally found out why. I did posit the suggestion that perhaps Axel had something to do with that. I didn't think he had, and perhaps I can say it's a good thing that he didn't, obviously. Not good that his brother is in a wheelchair. I think Dion is at university, and I think he's been able to get on with his life at university. He hasn't been a target, as far as I know. Although, of course, I did reveal on the last show that Leanne Lucas, the teacher who's in charge of the Taylor Swift dance class, she's been abused, as has a local businessman who was also stabbed by Axel that day. They've been abused on social media, so I'm sure, I imagine his brother has probably cancelled all his social media accounts. But the parents were basically interviewed by the police on the day of the attack. The police basically swarmed their house, and ever since then they have apparently been in a safe house, so they have had to just instantly throw up their lives, you'd presume. We don't know where they are for obvious reasons. And at the inquiry, with the 3 of them giving their testimonies, individually I should say, the conditions were slightly different. They were done by video link. The press could only hear their voices. The press was seated so they couldn't see the video, so it was only the inquiry chair and whoever others were at the main table that could see Dion, Alphonse and Laetitia. And no photos or audio have been released. So I was going purely by text, but even just by text, it was pretty emotional and highly charged, particularly with the parents. What comes across really is that all 3 of them knew that Axel was a ticking time bomb. Let's start with Dion Rudakubana, who's 2 years older than Axel. First of all, he's asked if his parents ever spoke of their experiences in the Rwandan genocide, which caused them to seek asylum in the UK. Dion replies, "Particular stories, I guess, slowly accumulated over time. My parents used discretion in telling us. Things were left out until we were older. I wouldn't say I was traumatised by them, but I emotionally engaged with them." And then it's asked what he was like growing up with Axel. Dion says their conversations were intense and more involved, likely due to both of them being autistic. He said his brother would hit him, but in hindsight that was not unusual for primary school age boys. So it seems that even before Dion was confined to a wheelchair, Axel was perhaps a bit bigger and stronger than him, but it sounds like the normal fighting between 2 brothers. Dion was diagnosed with a neuromuscular disorder at the age of 12, which led to him becoming a wheelchair user and led to his parents helping him more. So it appears then that there was tension. Essentially, up until that age, he got more attention than I did because he was younger, so there was a change in focus. Okay, a change in focus, yeah, you can imagine that one child would be a bit more jealous, but if your brother is going to be confined to a wheelchair, you'd like to think that you would have some sympathy there. Dion confirmed that after the move to Southport, Axel's mood appeared to deteriorate, particularly when he moved from primary school to Range High School in Formby. He said Axel would become despondent and have violent outbursts. His frustration was a result of his lower mood. I was concerned because he was bigger, physically larger, and it would hurt more. Dion agrees that he became increasingly wary of his brother, who would hit him regularly. That possibly suggests that Axel was deteriorating slightly earlier than we think. He does not recall Axel being violent to his parents before he was expelled from Range High School in 2019. I think that was October. His behaviour became significantly more violent after this. He says it opened up to everyone in the house and things were basically getting smashed. Did that continue all the way through until 2024? Dion said there were periods of improvement in 2020, but then progressively got worse again. He said after he left for university in 2022, Axel spoke to him less because he was not familiar with having me around. and by 2023 that had gone down to nothing. So the two boys had separate bedrooms. Axel became annoyed by Dion speaking late at night because of the thin walls. One video about Axel called him entitled. We do get that sense. Dion suggested if Axel became violent, too much damage would be caused by my dad trying to restrain him. So again, we're getting this little theme here of the parents and the brother realising that, okay, you can't just let this guy do whatever he wants, but if you do try and restrain him, then the consequences could be worse. That's quite an important point. He also told his friends there was a risk of Axel doing something potentially fatal. He said the fights are scary because of the danger of someone dying. I think this is a message that he wrote to a friend. By that point in 2022, Dion said he believed his brother had tried to stab his father before, adding that he was not sure. Boyle, who's the questioner, then asked, by this time you had a serious fear that your brother would kill a member of your family. If things escalated to that point, Dion replies. He says he never thought to tell anyone about that fear because things had been growing gradually. So, I mean, that contradicts something that I was saying earlier, that it wasn't necessarily gradual and that there was there was violence at the end of 2019, but obviously Dion knows better than me what was going on, so I'll defer to him. Dion was away from the family home a lot whilst at university. He's asked how much he knew about his brother's contact with mental health or police services. Dion replies he covered his ears when discussions were going on because I didn't want to hear it. When asked how his parents reacted to Axel's violent behaviour, he said, it was always shocking. I think it was the fear that marked all of these. Dion clarifies that he means Axel was not just being naughty, but was struggling to manage situations. I don't know what punishment would have looked like. We said there was a general risk to life in general conversation. If you tried to confront him, it wouldn't be responded to well. Dion says his parents were looking for outside services to help his brother. Now, referring to his father's conduct when they were young, they would get a smack bottom for being naughty when they were younger, but he had no concerns about his dad and had not been hit recently. Dion tells the Inquiry around that time Axel had read some articles by educational psychologists which suggested physically striking children could traumatise them, and that he felt very wronged by being smacked as a young boy. So this is a constant theme. What is starting to emerge is that Axel has a big obsession with injustice, let's say. Obviously this anger is welling up and he feels wronged by the person that bullied him, possibly by the teachers. And some of that may be justified. I mean, bullying is a terrible thing. I said in one of the other episodes I talked about when I got revenge on a bully. Basically, it was one punch. It wasn't anything like what Axel did. But when you do get that sense that the world is not treating you right, then you will turn on people. Dion is asked, would you agree your parents had lost control of Axel? Yes, he replies. When asked about his brother's capacity for empathy, Dion referred to his brother as reminding him of a character in the film No Country for Old Men. I think I've been told that character is meant to be a sociopath, and that's why I use the word there. He agrees that from around 2021, Axel would dominate the living room and he would avoid it. Now, I know that film No Country for Old Men pretty well, and I've read the book as well. And I remember when the first time I watched the film, I thought, this guy is the Javier Bardem character. It's so pointless what he's doing. He just gets someone to flip a coin and then just blows them away for absolutely no reason. And for the victims of this Southport attack, I was saying in one of the other episodes, perhaps if Axel had had some ideology, it might have made it not better, but just very slightly not as terrible. It's because it's so senseless. Similar thing, because I got a podcast about John Lennon, I talked about Mark David Chapman before. What's so horrible is it's so senseless, and the fact that Axel was completely silent going around this room, stabbing all these children in horrific ways. And No Country for Old Men, that film, although it's a brilliant piece of filmmaking, there's something quite horrible about watching it, because seeing these killings, just seeing people being blown away for absolutely no reason, I think this is one of the things that's extra sad about what Axel did. Dion says the last interaction he had with his brother was in summer 2023, so a year before the attacks. That doesn't mean that he didn't see his brother, but that was the last time he really had any interaction. On that occasion, their parents asked Axel to say goodbye to him as he was leaving to see his friends, and in response, Axel threw a bottle at him. Now, I did hear, I think in one of the testimonies, that it was actually a metal bottle, some sort of metal container. Dion says he had closed the door before the bottle hit. You know, I mean, that does suggest that Axel was already just a really nasty piece of work, as they say. You know, I mean, your brother's in a wheelchair. You're slightly jealous of the attention he's getting. I mean, that was a few years earlier. And now you're just throwing a bottle at him. So I think Dion was also in fear of his life. What we will see later on is that it seems to be the father that was the most at risk of being killed inside the home. Seems that Axel did have a bit more regard for his mother, and his brother had basically stopped interacting with. Now, if we go back a little bit, Dion actually goes back to February 2019, when Axel was in Year 8 at the Range High School. He became aware that his brother was being bullied. He remembers his father speaking to a teacher about it quite frequently after school, saying his father had brought up the bullying on behalf of his brother. After Axel was expelled, he heard from other pupils that it was widely known in his year group he was being bullied. Now, Boyle, who's questioning him, says the Range staff strongly denied a comment in Dion's statement suggesting there were a lot of troublemakers in that school. And I mentioned earlier about this thing about a culture of violence or aggression between the kids. Dion continued to stay at the school after Axel was expelled. I don't know what extent of trouble there would have to be for me to leave. It was never sufficient for me to leave. The school also denied Axel was subjected to a, quote, systematic pattern of bullying. Dion says his brother never spoke to him directly about being bullied, saying that he heard about it from his father and he didn't see any bullying of Axel with his own eyes. Dion gave the testimony on the afternoon of one of the days. I think it was the third from last day of the inquiry, this phase of it. And on the penultimate day, carried on with his testimony. Richard Boyle begins by asking Dion about a visit from a Lancashire police officer to the family home on 7th of October 2019. Dion says he was at home but not in the same room. He recalls his brother telling the officer directly he had a knife and had intended to use it. So I think we knew that already. Now, Dion, in his witness statement that was made earlier, claims that knife carrying at the Range High School was pretty common and questioned if expelling his brother was to make an example of him. This has been strongly denied by school management, with head teacher Mr. McGarry telling the inquiry there have been no incidents of knife carrying in the 6 years since 2019. Dion says he trusts his friends who told him this information. Now, I don't know of too many schools where knife carrying is considered a normal thing, so I think that might be a bit dubious. Dion is asked about the incident when his brother returned to the range with a hockey stick in December 2019. He said he saw the teenager on the school grounds and mentioned to a teaching assistant, "I don't think he should be here." He said a short time later he saw his brother running. He was deeply troubled when he found out what had happened, that Axel Rudakubana had attacked a fellow pupil with a hockey stick. Then he's asked about the killer's time at the Acorn School. That was the first, I believe, special school that he was sent to. Dion said in his statement he believed his brother was being picked on, which was denied by the school. He'd stopped attending the school during the coronavirus lockdowns, refused to engage when teachers tried to visit at home. Dion said his brother would get very agitated when asked to come down, and the family feared it could provoke a violent response. So once again, that's what they're fearing, that if Axel is pushed in any way, something horrific could happen. Now, I won't be able to go through all of this, but one thing that I did want to discuss is that in the headlines about this case, they talk about Axel accessing certain horrific things on his laptop. Obviously, if he's looking at tortures and beheadings and school shootings and things like that, I mean, that is worrying. But then when it says, he was researching the London Bridge attack, for example, that might not mean that he was actually researching it because he was interested in the violence of it. And there's an interesting comment here. Dion said he knew his brother was interested in history and global injustices. So there's that word again, injustice. He said in his statement he believed his brother held, quote, mainstream views, but with an unusual intensity or depth of feeling. So it could be that Axel, apart from an interest in violence, was interested in how the world worked and was interested in history. And obviously the fact that his parents had survived the Rwandan genocide, if you put that together with a history and perhaps some interest in violence, then it does make sense that he would be interested in that. We know that he was also at one point trying to learn his native language. When asked if Axel had made comments to his brother about terrorist attacks and the Holocaust, he said, "Not directly to me. I think at this point our conversations were decreasing. I had less time to engage in them as I was doing my A-levels." And then they're looking at the angle of his views towards women, because obviously he targeted a class of all little girls. Though he did attack a man as well, of course. Dion said his brother never commented to him about any concerning views towards women. Now, one of the other things that mentioned is that he's researching former dictator Colonel Gaddafi. Now, don't forget that Colonel Gaddafi was a friend of the West when it suited us, as was Saddam Hussein, as was, I think, Osama bin Laden. I mean, that's used as a kind of evidence because he's researching one of our enemies. That's automatically a black mark. Axel recalled his brother meeting social workers from the Youth Justice Service as part of his referral order between 2020 and 2021, which was his sentence for the hockey stick attack. There was one point where it's noted Dion's evidence is difficult to hear. Many of his answers begin audibly, but then he drops his voice and his replies start to ramble and then tail off. Mr. Boyle asks about his younger sibling's autism diagnosis. Dion says his brother did not want to be diagnosed with autism and instead believed he had ADHD. His brother was also prescribed medication for anxiety but did not like how it made him feel, so stopped taking it. And I mentioned in one of the other shows that I'd been prescribed Prozac when I lived in London, and I had a terrible reaction. I felt absolutely awful, 10 times more depressed than I might have been feeling before I took it. Mr. Boyle asked Dion about one particular very scary incident that resulted in the police being called. On that occasion, the killer had been trying to pull the windscreen wipers off a rental car. In his statement, Dion said the police had been called because, quote, "we were scared he might kill my dad." Regarding the incident that we talked about, being caught with a knife on a bus, Dion said he recalled hearing his brother speaking to his mother calmly after the incident. Mr. Boyle asked about 14th of May 2022, the final police incident. Dion said his brother had become violent after being denied access to a computer, describing the moment as very scary. He said he had covered his ears because he was afraid. "I think I covered my ears every time the police came," he said. Dion said he would have expected some kind of referral after these incidents. Now, there's one interesting thing here. I did ask, and a lot of people have asked about, well, how did Axel get the money for all these weapons? Did he just get his father to pay for them? Dion says his brother had a genealogy business at some point which earned him, quote, "real money." I think in one of the statements he possibly mentioned thousands of pounds. Due to his disability, Dion would not answer the door and did not take packages in. He said he can remember at least one occasion when his brother answered the door to collect a parcel and the packages were, quote, "never touched." "Was that the instruction from your brother?" "Yes." He said there were many parcels that came, including very normal things such as books, and the younger sibling would generally not want his family to touch his stuff. He would get quite angry if we did. Dion denies basically seeing knives being delivered or seeing packages that were obviously weapons. Dion tells the inquiry, "I didn't feel sufficiently there was an imminent threat for my life as a result of these packages." "Did you think about the threat to others?" "No, I didn't associate the risk of harm with anybody outside the home. It's within the home that it was apparent on a daily basis." Now, a week before the attacks, as we've already talked about a couple of times, Alphonse, the father, managed to plead with the taxi driver not to take Axel back to the range. The killer had told his father, "If you stop me again, there will be consequences." Dion says his dad tried not to bother me with these things, but would sometimes warn him to be careful around his brother. Dion came home from university, I think it's three or 4 days before the attack. His father picked him up. Dion is asked if he was told about the 22nd of July incident, that's the aborted trip to the range high school, during the drive home. "I don't think I was told then. It's possible, but I don't think he was." But, I mean, the important thing was that he was told. "A lot of things have happened since. It's been quite traumatic. My memory on all this stuff is very shaky," which is something that the parents also say as well. Mr. Boyle refers to a message Dion sent to a friend on the Discord messaging app on 27th of July, 2 days before the attack. The message said, "Now I've got here, your brother is dangerous, he can kill you." So presumably if Dion's sending it, it should be, "My brother is dangerous, he can kill you." He confirmed he was repeating a warning his father had given, although he said his father did not directly use the words "kill you," but rather indicated there was a threat to life. regarding coming home a couple of days before the attack, Dion said he did not talk to his brother on that visit home, but felt the tension. The older brother told police in his statement he was talking to himself a lot on that weekend and sounded like he was arguing. Now, this is a thing of people who are disturbed or are having disturbances, talking to yourself. When I was a young man, I went through periods when I was feeling pretty depressed and pretty angry that I would talk to myself, and I'd almost have arguments. Not arguing with myself, but having imagined conversations with people where I was getting angry with them. Turning to the 29th of July, the day of the attack, Dion said he woke up about 10:30 and his father helped him to shower. He said he saw his brother wearing a face mask, walking upstairs into his bedroom and then turning around, walking downstairs and out of the house. He said he did not notice his brother carrying anything, but that his sleeves were pulled down over his hands. I turned to my dad and asked him whether he'd gone out by himself before, and he said no. I got a bit nervous. Initially I was quite surprised. My mum got up and the idea that he was going out for a walk came about. My parents seemed very sure about this. My mum went back to bed because she was resting for a night shift. Dion said he made the association between his brother leaving and the incident on 17th of March 2022 when he was found on a bus with a knife. However, I trusted the fact that my parents had been home consistently at that time and they had reason to believe going on a walk was the case. That seems a bit rambling, but I'm not sure why he would make the association with something that happened 2.5 years earlier. Anyway, Mr. Boyle asked, your worry was that he was not going out for a walk but to carry out an attack? Dion says, initially, potentially yes, but it was subdued by the contradiction that was shown by my parents. I think that might be supposed to say conviction. Basically, he felt reassured because his parents thought that Axel was just going for a walk. Now, this is very important. Mr. Boyle asked Dion about his mother showing him empty packaging from a knife shortly after his brother left the house on the day of the attack. Dion says, I thought there was a concern in relation to the knife packaging that was shared between all of us. I don't recall anything in particular being said. He confirmed the packaging was found in the washing machine. In his statement, he said, neither parent appeared alarmed, and I took comfort from this. My mum went to bed, as he's already said, so I quickly calmed down from the concerns. Dion says he got dressed and went downstairs to get ready to go out and see friends. He then noticed a box in the living room with a similar set of knife packaging to the one in the washing machine. With all this in mind, why did he not consider calling the police? Dion said once again that while he'd been initially concerned, his parents' calmer reaction lessened his fears. Dion said he bumped into a friend, that's later that day, after he went out, who mentioned there'd been stabbings in town, which began to worry him. He said he had a suspicion by now that his brother was involved and feared his parents had been killed. So that might seem a bit odd because the stabbings are obviously in town, not in the house. But I think the fact that he would consider that the first targets would be the parents seems to be pretty logical based on what you're going to hear in a minute from the parents. He'd never heard anything to suggest a dance class would be a target. Now, he's asked here why he thinks that his brother targeted the people he did. He said he'd considered it may have been because children are very valuable and they are the future of society and it would hurt society very badly. But these are only thoughts I've had in retrospect. Mr. Boyle asks him, in hindsight, do you think you should have done anything differently or reported any of your concerns? I felt as I felt. I didn't feel suspicion sufficiently to report at any of these points. In his statement, he had said he was devastated and deeply saddened by what happened and the immense pain it caused. So that's Dion's testimony. Later on the penultimate day, Alphonse Rudakubana gave testimony, followed by Axel's mother on the last day. So let's go to those. Again, there's a lot of information. This is becoming a very long podcast. I promised to myself it would be under 4 hours, which it will be. So, to Alphonse Rudakubana, it's noted in the updates that he's softly spoken. We know that he was spoken well of by a neighbour. That was a clip on LBC. I think it was in the show notes of one of the episodes I did. But maybe not squeaky clean, because we already know that, as I covered in the last show, a female psychiatrist had requested that Axel be reallocated to a male psychiatrist as she found his dad to be intimidating and verbally aggressive and she no longer felt safe. So we're going to get a bit more of an idea of Alphonse here. So in this evidence here to the inquiry, he's at a secret location. As I mentioned earlier, his face not visible to the public. Nicholas Moss, KC, lead counsel to the inquiry, asked for him to take the oath. Mr. Rudakubana as we said, softly spoken, has a Rwandan accent, swears on the Bible. He confirms he has corrected several things in his statement that he told the police in the aftermath of the attack. He said there was some mistake, probably from the pressure or the fact my voice was not coming out properly, but the intention was that what I was saying was true. He was born in Rwanda in 1975 and lived through the genocide in 1994. Many of his family and friends were killed, including his parents and 3 sisters. He was taken by armed groups and threatened on a number of occasions, he confirmed. So there's clearly a great level of trauma with him based on what he had experienced and the threats he'd received. And you'd have to possibly imagine that there were knives involved with that. I'm not sure. That is intimated later on, as you'll hear. Came to the UK in 2002, granted asylum the next year. Dion born in 2004, Axel born in 2006. It is known that the killer was interested in African history. Asked when he was told about the Rwandan genocide, Alphonse said, "We made a decision to wait until they grew up and would be less affected. I was surprised. They came home and were talking about the genocide in Rwanda, both of them. They were learning about it in school. We then told them a few things we thought they could handle." He said he did not believe this discussion affected his family life in the UK. What affected them was that we were a small family with 2 friends from Rwanda. They could see we were kind of lonely compared to their peers, their friends from school. So they'll see we were in a foreign land, even though they were born here. They moved to Southport in 2012 when his wife secured a job there. From 2013, his wife began working shifts, and he took on the role of doing the school runs. So he's almost like a house husband, but he became a taxi driver to help with their income. Dion had to go to Range High School in Formby due to his disability, rather than Christ the King High School, which is where most of their peers went. They made a decision as a family to send Axel to the same school rather than moving to Christ the King with his friendship group, which in hindsight was a mistake. So that was maybe the first thing that maybe Axel had a bad reaction to, which is quite normal. When I moved school when I was 8 or 9, and I don't know, in some strange way, perhaps maybe I never quite recovered from that. Alphonse agrees with the school's evidence. The first signs of deterioration came in Year 8 or the 2018-19 academic year. His younger son had become more withdrawn, did not talk about school life, and was spending a lot of his time playing the video game Fortnite. He was challenging in that he was always pushing the envelope or the boundaries that we had set. I had this parental control, but even the game Fortnite meant that I had to change the parental controls. His son would relentlessly complain that all of his friends were able to play it and he was feeling lonely. Alphonse is unsure if he was playing more violent games aimed at older users. In that academic year, Alphonse requested a special educational needs assessment. He had also raised the issue in primary school and contacted a GP but did not get a response and had forgotten about it. Right, so that changes it slightly. So the special needs assessment in primary school, I mean, that could be to do with his autism. That doesn't mean that he's necessarily acting out at that point. Alphonse wrote to a safeguarding lead at Range High School complaining his son was getting more detentions than other children who behaved similarly and that Rudakubana felt unfairly targeted. The teacher replied, "This is his perception, not that of the teachers." Now, what's quite interesting in all this testimony, the racial element wasn't really brought up, which is quite strange in the times that we're living in, where that seems to be seized upon either with some justification or not. But that's never really mentioned here. I don't know if Alphonse is implying that. He was struggling with detentions and they were piling up because each teacher was giving him detention. They didn't know the other had given him detention in the previous class. He was not managing the problems, he was in distress. At that time he was listening to me and he was vulnerable. So at that point I had to intervene. Alphonse is a bit defensive about, quote, taking teachers to task. He says, "As a parent I had a duty of care to make sure my son was coping." Mr. Moss says, "Can you see there was a mismatch between what your son was reporting to you as being the problems at school and the reality as perceived by the teachers?" Alphonse said he would discuss and challenge his son about incidents at school, but he also believed he had been unfairly treated. His son's behaviour deteriorated over a very short period between Year 8 and the start of Year 9. So yes, the start of Year 9 would be September 2019, so that seems to check out because he got expelled the year after. He called Childline about that time, saying, "What do I do if I want to kill somebody?" That shows some self-awareness, and it seems that he was, as Alphonse said, he was listening to his parents, but that seemed to stop fairly quickly. When asked about Axel's outbursts, Alphonse answered, "It was random. I don't remember exactly how many times. It depended on who was talking to him and what they said. For example, if they're talking about subjects they don't agree and they both have strong opinions, he would get angry and have the outburst. It could be twice a day, it could be several. It's difficult to remember because it was a long time ago, but it was much more than when he was in mainstream education." Okay, so he's talking about after he was expelled from range. Now, quite interesting, he says that his son would bring up things from the past and accuse his father of striking him. Now, this was touched on earlier about, this is another thing that happens when people have a lot of anger. They bring up things from the past. They hold things in their mind instead of dealing with them, and then they use them almost as ammunition later on. So the fact that Dion said about them being maybe slippered by their father when they were young, Axel seems to be remembering these things. Everything started when he came home, when he lost his education. The December 29 attack with a hockey stick was a stark example. Alphonse has tried to suggest there was always a trigger for his son's anger. Alphonse confirmed that by January 2021 he believed his son actively hated me. In November 2021 there were 4 incidents of specific violence. November the 5th, Axel Rudakubana became angry that someone could see him through the door when he was asleep. Mr. Moss asked why Alphonse called the police on 30th of November when his son damaged a rental car. He says, "Because the car was not mine. I felt pretty sad because it came from no big deal, just the food I cooked. I'd spent 2 hours hunting the ingredients and I cooked this food and he didn't like it and he insulted it." Mr. Moss suggests Alphonse had not been sharing the full details of the incidents over those months and asked why. Alphonse replies, he called the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, that's CAMS, that was covered in the last episode, for one incident and nothing happened. Mr. Moss suggests that he did not report all the violent incidents to CAMS. He responds, "When I told the police, I expected all the agencies and professionals to know at some point. I didn't have to inform them separately." In the inquiry in general, there seems to be quite a lot of, perhaps passing the buck would be a bit harsh, but certain agencies, or in this case the father, expecting that others would be dealing with things. "I knew my son was autistic by then. That made me be very forgiving to him, more understanding and letting it happen because he would always calm down and have a normal life." So what we get here is obviously the parents protecting their son, perhaps trying to see him in as good a light as possible, and also sympathetic because of his autism. He had become conditioned to being assaulted by his son, who would react violently to any attempt to impose discipline. "I'm ashamed that this was my response and I felt demeaned, but I did not know what else to do." Alphonse is asked if he was afraid his son would be taken away. His answers have very often veered away from the questions asked, and he begins to discuss his son's autism once more. This time Sir Adrian Fulford, the inquiry chairman, intervenes and asks him to focus on the following question. "Were you concerned that your son was going to be taken away from you?" Yes. Alphonse Rudakubana is reminded to try to respond only to the questions he is asked. Nicholas Moss, KC, counsel of the inquiry, begins, so this is a new session, asked him about an incident in May 2022 when Axel Rudakubana flooded the bathroom of his home in response to being denied access to a laptop. This resulted in the police being called. I think this happened in the early hours of the morning. I think we mentioned that on the last show. Mr. Moss reads a line from a police report which says his parents are struggling to cope. They're going to contact CAMS and his GP. When asked why you did not do this, Alphonse says previously when they attended they said they were going to contact the council and school, so I was thinking they were going to tell them. So once again he's expecting that others are going to deal with this. They then move on to early 2024, reading from Alphonse's statement which told how his son's attitude and behaviour at home can be very frightening. Around this time his father remembered how his son had poured a significant quantity of oil over his head and threatened to kill him in very menacing terms. When asked about this, Alphonse said his son appeared to be in some kind of mental pain before he poured a bottle of cooking oil over him. He came in front of me, he was poking me in my chest, saying, "If you get me out of here in this house, it may take a week, it may be a month, maybe years, but trust me, I will kill you." Now, you can't downplay how shocking that must have been to the father. As we'll hear in a minute, I mean, Alphonse admits he made mistakes, as does his wife, Axel's mother. But, I mean, that is shocking. And it's complicated, as we said, by the fact that Axel was a teenager, was a child, basically. And both the social services and the parents are going to perhaps give him a bit too much leeway because he's a child. In Mr. Rudakubana's, Alphonse's statement, he says he and his wife were very scared of their son. The combination of fear and the desire to avoid confrontation by not inquiring into his activities and accepting his punishments undoubtedly prevented me from doing things that would be expected of a parent, such as to monitor his internet activity. This had catastrophic consequences for which I'm desperately sorry. So what's happening here is that he's being interviewed for the inquiry, but parts of his statement that he'd already made are being read out. Continuing to read from the statement, it says his failure to control his son meant he accepted his share of the responsibility. The barrister suggests that despite his fear of his son, he should have at least tried to exert more control over his internet activity. Alphonse said he had tried, but his son was violent. Mr. Moss cites further examples of him giving in far too easily. He also suggests Mr. Rudakubana should have been candid with different agencies. Alphonse said he believed that different agencies knew enough to intervene. I think we've already covered that. Mr. Moss tells Alphonse the inquirer had been told, including by him, that he used to smack his children on the bottom as a punishment when they were younger, which he says is true. He said he only responded with physical violence to his son's behaviour as an older teenager on one occasion in January 2021 in response to Axel kicking him in the testicles. Alphonse said he assaulted me that day. The inquiry hears this was after his son became enraged that his father had cut the grass over which his pet hamster was buried and tried to break his father's laptop. Alphonse said he slapped his son on that occasion. So we can see again, Axel is clearly looking for injustice at every turn, and he's looking for reasons to be violent. Mr. Moss suggests, on occasion you have the capability to be less than honest. Alphonse said this is a big conclusion to make from one incident. Because I think Alphonse on a few occasions says, I can't remember exactly what happened. I should say one thing, that it seems that Dion, Alphonse and Laetitia didn't collude to, corroborate each other's stories, because there is some contradiction here. We have to presume that Dion is in contact with his parents. Whether the parents are in contact with Axel in jail, that's another story. Are they sending him money? Are they visiting him? Well, I guess they wouldn't be visiting him because they're in a safe house. Mr. Moss suggests his son was capable of being an outright liar to those in authority. Alphonse says he could lie sometimes, but I wouldn't call him an outright liar. He lied when it suited him. Now we move on to an incident in June 2023 when a machete was delivered to the house. In his statement, Alphonse had written, but by that point his son had threatened to kill him on more than one occasion. There was a time when he started to fantasize a lot, talking about countries in Africa, and then he would say that he will be a president there and take me and put me in one of their jails. He said, Alphonse said he did not take these comments as seriously as the day he poked him in the chest. That was the time when he poured the oil over him. Mr. Moss then asked Alphonse about his older son Dion telling a friend that he was worried that his brother would kill his father. Dion had written, my brother doesn't really show mercy, so my dad just has to try not to die. Alphonse said he believed his older son may have been exaggerating to his friends. He said by that point, Axel had not used a weapon against him. Referring to Dion giving evidence to the inquiry about the situation at home, Alphonse said, I actually cried yesterday. I didn't know how Dion was internalising things. That's how his experience was. Mr. Moss then asked about Rudakubana's claim, this is Axel, his claim that in 2019 he'd carried a knife into Range High School because he was being bullied. Alphonse said he now believed he had been too accepting of his son's bullying claim. However, he said his son appeared to be scared to go to school and would constantly ask him to talk to teachers about being bullied. In May 2019, Axel had claimed to have been thrown by another boy in school. Mr. Moss says, do you now accept that your son's response to the alleged bullying, carrying knives into school, was wholly disproportionate and inappropriate? Alphonse says, I agree with you. He reiterates that he believed that the social services should have been communicating with each other. Now they talk about the killer calling Childline. Again, we've covered that a few times. Saying that he'd carried a knife into school 10 times. The charity, Childline, then referred the matter to the police. Moss says they were trying to help your son, and your approach in very firm terms was to say to a different part of social services, You are not to share anything with them. You were trying to control the agencies, even when the agencies were trying to help your son. I was worried about the breach of confidentiality, says Alphonse. Right, now we move to the final day, the first phase of the inquiry. So Nicholas Moss, KC, is continuing to question Alphonse, this time about his interaction with CAMS, the mental health service. If at times you were grinning or looking cheerful at things, it was just a reaction to the embarrassment to the way your son was behaving. Yes, replied Alphonse. Moss puts it to Alphonse that he had verbally, aggressively demanded that a consultant psychiatrist who was caring for his son change the content of her own clinic letter. Do you see how inappropriate it was for you to write in verbally aggressive demanding terms? He went on to ask Alphonse in hindsight whether he'd done anything wrong or whether there was more he could have done. No, replies Alphonse, who denied that he had acted like, quote, a keyboard warrior. Now there's more of his written statement being read out. He says there would have been an immediate violent response if he had tried to exert control over his son. I did not over-accommodate my son. There may have been an element of resignation, but I was not blithe. Mr. Moss says, you did withhold information from CAMS because you did not tell them about the weapons. Mr. Rudakubana is silent for some time before answering, yeah, I would correct it. And that's a statement he'd previously given. You accept that you withheld information to the mental health services who were seeking to help your son? Some information, yes. Alphonse said he knew by July 2024 that his son had bought knives and a jerry can. That's a petrol can. That month, CAMS concluded in an assessment that Rudakubana did not pose a risk to others. That's a phrase that will probably become infamous in the future. They literally said, risk to others, none. And he was basically signed off from the social services a week before the attack. Responding to the suggestion there was a massive difference between what the father knew about his son's collection of weapons and the CAMS assessment, Alphonse says, I believe he posed a risk to me, only me. Incredibly, it appears that his son, Axel, did not leave the house alone, it says. So he may have left with others, but he did not leave the house alone for 2.5 years until the actual day of the attack, apart from going into the taxi right outside the house the week before the attack. The inquiry hears how Alphonse accepted a delivery of a machete ordered by his son on 23rd of June 2023, which he hid. Alphonse said he had never opened packages that had been delivered to his home for his son, as that would trigger a violent outburst. So why, having intercepted the package, seeing that it was a knife or a bladed item your son had specifically asked for, didn't you open it to check what on earth it was that your son was actually buying? I was scared of it, says Alphonse, adding, I was afraid I would have been attacked. And this is quite a strange one. It wasn't my property. You knew this was not a small kitchen knife. Yes, I did. Mr. Moss puts to him how his actions could lead some to question how much he actually cared about what was in the package. I knew it was a knife, and had I opened it, it would have been good, as it would have led me to call the police. Now, just bear in mind that although he's spent a lot of time in England, English is not his first language. So if he says things which, if he uses turns of phrase, it might be a bit strange. That could be the reason. When he said it would have been good, I mean, he's saying that in the sense it would have been a better thing to do to open it, because then he might have called the police. He says he regrets not informing the police about the machete delivered to his home, claiming the Southport attack wouldn't have happened if he had done so. So at times, both the parents seem to defend themselves, but then they seem to admit things at the same time. Both their testimonies are quite, I'm going to say, curious. Asked what message, him taking no further action beyond intercepting the package sent to his son, he means the message sent to his son, Alphonse said, I think it may have emboldened him, encouraged him to order more things. Alphonse did not know a second delivery in October of that year also contained a weapon, despite the packaging reading age verification 18 or over, and with Knife Warehouse as the return address. I picked it up, but I didn't read the content. I didn't know it was a knife. I wouldn't have given it to him. Mr. Rudakubana is now being questioned about where his son got his money from to purchase the weapons. I gave him some money. He managed the money I gave him. He tells the inquiry he would reward his son for good behaviour at home. I would reward him if he had a shower. I would give him £40, for example. I remember twice he had £40, £80 and money for occasions, and when he asked me to give him any. Yeah, that might sound strange about having a shower, but the reason I think he did that was because Axel had a period where he wasn't washing, he wasn't dressing, he wasn't tidying his room. So although that might sound quite absurd, I can kind of understand it. I mean, £40 seems like a lot, but he's rewarding him for basically taking care of himself, because that's what the parents want him to do. The inquiry here is out. At some point before the Southport attack, Alphonse noticed a bow and arrow under his son's bed amongst other boxes. I saw it when he was brushing his teeth. It was visible under the bed. He adds that since then he changed the way he spoke to him, because if something goes wrong and he gets enraged, he would use it against me. So he mentions that a few times, that he's basically terrified. This is another bit of shocking information. Did you do anything when you first noticed the jerry can, which is the petrol can? Alphonse says he did not ask his son about this, despite his son not learning to drive at the time or using heavy machinery. When I saw it, I just thought about it, what he would do with it, picturing him pouring petrol over me and burning me. He says at another point that he believes that maybe he was going to the range, his old school, on the 22nd of July, to possibly commit arson. The inquiry heard from investigating officer, Detective Chief Inspector Jason Pye, that was earlier in the inquiry, who agreed when it was put to him that there was no innocent reason for the teenager to want a jerry can. A week before the attack, Alphonse tells the inquiry he noticed a container with a substance in it, later revealed to be ingredients to make ricin, a chemical poison. He says he flushed the substance down the toilet, not knowing what it was. I didn't even wash it, I just put it straight in the toilet. The week before the attack, Alphonse said his son asked when the range was breaking up for the summer. He looked on his phone and saw that it was the last day of term that day. He made a comment to the effect of, "They will all be going off to university now," to which Axel replied with words to the effect of, "Well, I won't be, will I?" So he's obviously bitter about that, about how his education has gone. And as we saw earlier, it seems to be being expelled from the Range High School. He seems to have taken great offence to that. And again, something happened in his brain where he just couldn't see that he was partly in the wrong by coming to school carrying a knife and attacking someone with a hockey stick. That was a couple of months after that. The taxi driver, Mr. Everson, gave a statement to the police inquiry and recalled Axel's dad pleading with him, "Don't take him, don't take him." Axel said in response, "I'm 18 and I want to go, take me." The inquiry hears the taxi driver said he didn't want to get in the middle of a domestic and so told Axel he would not be able to take him. He described Axel as calm and he got out of the taxi without an issue. We have seen he kind of slams the door though. Alphonse gave the taxi driver £5 to cover his travel out of Southport. I think I remarked earlier that Axel is a strange mixture of calm, and in the taxi video on the 29th of July he's very calm. He looks a bit intense, he's just staring at his phone the whole time basically. But he's obviously capable of just these sudden outbursts, and that's what makes it so scary that for years before the attacks he was capable of this. But as we've seen, it's mostly confined to the home. Apparently, I may have covered this in the last show, I can't remember. After Axel left the taxi, this is on the 22nd of July, he went back into the house, shut the door, and Alphonse stayed outside. He then contacted Laetitia, that's Axel's mother, and waited outside till she returned. Alphonse suspected Axel had a weapon on him that day, but did not call the police. And here he confirms, "My son had not left the house since March 2022. The last time he did so had been to stab someone," counsel for the inquiry Nicholas Moss, KC, says. So we covered that earlier about when he was found on a bus. I think he'd said to the police he was going to stab someone, but why didn't he stab someone then? He was on a bus surrounded by members of the public. In a statement, Alphonse previously said his son had told him after he prevented the taxi journey, "Next time if you stop me there will be consequences." So it seems like he said that quite a few times. When asked if he believed his son was thinking about launching another attack, Alphonse replied, "Not necessarily. I didn't see it that way, that the next time he stepped out of the house he would be going to attack people. We took it as a one-off episode." Obviously it's not a one-off episode inside the home, but the gist of all this is that Alphonse is saying that he didn't believe his son would leave the house and attack others. In a message to his wife after the taxi incident, this is 22nd of July, Alphonse wrote, "Our child needs to be protected. Imagine how those things have faded away, and he could have been killed or imprisoned for good, for life. You need to make sure that he eats well, please. He uses his brain a lot." Alphonse tells the inquiry he should have alerted police to his son's behaviour. "We knew what to do. We wanted to buy some time. We thought we had some time," Alphonse says of the taxi incident. But that week I wasn't ready myself. We knew what to do, we knew that it was a police matter this time, but I didn't have the courage to do it on my own. And this is really the crux. He says, I'm ashamed. I accept that responsibility. It was obvious then, but it required so much courage. Now moving to the day of the attack, Alphonse says he spoke to his son in the early hours of 29th of July. He said he'd been helping his older son when he heard the soon-to-be killer leave the house before shouting to his wife to check. The teenager did not appear to be carrying anything according to his wife. Yeah, I mean, I could understand that. The week before he'd been carrying a backpack with a knife in. So if he'd gone out of the house without a backpack, I do understand that, they're obviously, in their mind, they want to believe the best of their son. So they're going to put two and two together and say, well, he's obviously not going to attack anyone, because why wouldn't he bring a backpack? Bring the jerry can, full of petrol or whatever it was. Alphonse says that his wife could also not see a taxi. Obviously, Axel had decided that if he ordered a taxi to the house, his father would intervene again. So being a bit crafty, I think he actually went to a bus stop, called the taxi, then came back to the house. I'm not sure. I'm still not entirely sure whether Gary Poland picked him up from his house. I think he said he did in his testimony. But, people can forget these kind of things. You can't expect everybody to remember everything the same way. We know memory is very fallible. As I've said many times, police have taken eyewitness testimonies to road accidents, for example. One person will say it was a green car, another person will say it was a blue car, another person will say it was a yellow car. And in their minds, they're all clear about it. At 1 o'clock on 29th of July, Alphonse received a message from a member of his church about an attack in Southport. At this point, he feared his son might be involved. He then heard helicopters above the family home and was sure it was his son. Mr. Moss asks him, does this now show you were very aware of the risk when he went out earlier that you might be going out to do an attack? Mr. Rudakubana takes some time to respond, and his voice cracks as he does so. The hope I was clinging to was that he didn't take a bag. I was clinging to the hope he was going for a walk, and if I knew he was carrying a bag, I would have run out. I can't believe how calculating he was. It's something that's out of our understanding, how things aligned and how they played out. Nicholas Moss continues, is there any further evidence you can give why your son carried out an attack that ended up not on a bully, not someone he had a grudge with, but a group of totally innocent girls? No, I don't, replies Alphonse. There's no way to understand how he got there and chose that place. When asked if he had anything to say to the families of the 3 girls who were murdered, Mr. Rudakubana says, my deepest sympathy, my condolences for the beautiful angels whose lives were taken by my son. I'm so desperately sorry to them and everyone else who's been harmed. I cry for them all the time, because we have a reminder of my son who turned out to be a monster. I lost the courage to save the little angels. I could have done far more. He accepts his failure to alert authorities was immoral and unacceptable when these words were put to him. The love I had for him overrode my good judgment. The BBC and the Liverpool Echo updates of the testimonies were slightly different. I mean, the gist was obviously the same, but in another part of the statement, I'm sure he said, I still have a deep love for my son, which, again, from the outside is hard to imagine, but any parents listening to this, I'd be interested to know what you think about it. As a parent, you always want to believe the best, and that can cause you to take actions or not take actions, which from the outside just seem wholly inappropriate. Now, Nicholas Bowen, KC, who represents the families of the bereaved, addresses Alphonse Rudakubana, saying, they want me, all 3 sets of parents, to tell you, and I'm sorry to have to say this to you publicly and harshly, all 3 parents have listened to what you have written, they've listened to what you have said, and they have complete disdain for your excuses and the manner in which you have answered questions from Mr. Moss. Mr. Bowen is then cut off by the inquiry chair, Sir Adrian Fulford, who said the comment was not appropriate. So that's pretty aggressive, and we will hear one of the statements from victims' families later on. Finally, we get to Laetitia, Axel's mother. She's also softly spoken. She's asked to keep her voice up. She's also appearing on a video link from a remote location. She takes the oath. She says, each of us has come to the inquiry with open hearts. There are no words that will ever be enough to express our grief and remorse for those lives which were taken and whose lives were changed forever by our son's actions. As a mother, I grieve for my own son, but most of all for the innocent lives lost and that have been devastated. We are profoundly sorry and pray every day for the children and their families. There are many things Alphonse and I wish we had done differently, anything that might have prevented the horrific event of 29th of July 2024. For our failure, we are profoundly sorry. This sounds like it would be the closing statement, but this is actually before she's questioned. The inquiry here is that when Axel was in year 7, things appeared to be going well. The following year, when he moved into year 8, his attitude started to change. I'm going to refer to her as Laetitia because her surname, I don't want to keep butchering it. I think it's Muzayire, but I'll call her Laetitia. She tells the inquiry her son started to get in a bit of a mood and isolate himself. He was complaining of being bullied. He was like any other young boy, and then it got worse after he was expelled, where he became another person. He changed significantly. You were being told by the school as early as 2019, when he was 13 years old, that your son was looking at inappropriate things online. Laetitia replies, by that time we were very busy with our lives, and I thought Alphonse was doing some of it. So again, there's a little bit of this passing the buck, of people saying, I thought somebody else was dealing with it. The inquiry hears that in a record from a family support worker in October 2021, it was noted how Laetitia had indicated to her partner Alphonse to not share certain information about their son. I cannot remember because my memory is not good, she says. During the meeting, her son had refused to say why he had not been attending school. The support worker had noted it was clear Alphonse wanted to share this, but Laetitia was, quote, waving her arms and indicating in a zip action across her mouth. The reason why I was probably saying to keep quiet is because I didn't want the outbursts, because they were very distressing for us. So this is basically what Alphonse was saying as well. They're just afraid of their son's outbursts. She previously said, my son was not violent with other people other than his assault of a child with a hockey stick. He did not demonstrate violence towards anyone outside our family. Part of the reason, of course, is that he wasn't leaving the house. When it's put to her this was not the case, she replies it wasn't frequent. The counsel to the inquiry tells her this is manifestly not true. I didn't see him being violent to any other people like professional social services coming into our home. There's no evidence of her challenging her son's behaviour. You didn't seem to even attempt to do so. She replies, other things I've done which made our everyday life possible, which may not be visible, but I definitely did my best to make this family function. So she's trying to hold the family together. During questioning, she becomes upset, so the inquiry takes an impromptu break. Now, I'm skimming over quite a lot of this because a lot of the things she is repeating basically what her husband has said, and indeed what her older son has said. Regarding the events of 17th of March 2022, that's when he was found on the bus, she makes clear her memory is not very good of this. I don't remember being told about the comment my son made in the back of the police vehicle, and don't remember being told he wanted to stab somebody. However, the inquiry has heard how her husband and older son Dion were given this information by her. Now again, that could be a memory lapse. Not only do we have fallible memories, but we also try and forget things which are distressing. That doesn't have to be something that she's consciously doing. You know, the brain has certain filters that are not necessarily in our control. Nicholas Moss KC is now pressing Laetitia for comments made by her son about poison following the March 2022 incident. She was told by a police officer how her son had discussed wanting to make poison after he was caught with a knife on the bus. She says she has no recollection of her son saying anything about poison before then. Mr. Moss says, another possibility I have to raise with you is that you are not being entirely honest about this, and that your son had said something to you about poison on a previous occasion. And you said it to the officer, but you are now covering that up because you know it will put you in a very bad light. She replies, no. There is a Bible here if you want me to hold it and swear again. I learned about that in the news in sentencing that time. So that must be January this year. In a statement, she explains how her son's room was off limits. You couldn't go in there. He was firm about it and meant it. So if we think of a fairly normal teenager, I mean, that is a thing that teenagers want to keep their parents out of their bedroom. That can be a normal thing. Obviously, in this case, it's a much more extreme version of that. But that's not unheard of, is it, for teenagers to declare their room off limits? She says on one evening her son agreed that she and her husband could go into his bedroom to change the bed sheets. During questioning, she denies seeing any weapons at this time, but Mr. Moss says this is in direct contradiction to her husband's evidence. That's a sharp contrast to the evidence of your own husband, as he says he has a clear recollection of the shock on your face and you were petrified when you were cleaning the room together, and he was finding a number of weapons. He has seen alcohol, a bow and arrow, firecrackers. Essentially, you turned to each other. You were terrified. Did you see the bow and arrow? She replies, I did not see it myself. He told me some time ago, not at that time. She's then questioned more about the firecrackers and the alcohol, and she says, I am honest. I'm not lying or malicious with anything. Now, if they are practicing Christians, then, of course, swearing on the Bible and then lying to an inquiry would seem like something that she wouldn't do. I get the impression, I haven't heard her voice, I haven't seen her on video. All I'm going by is the text of these updates from the inquiry, and it just seems like she's a God-fearing person, probably quite a gentle person, softly spoken, and I think she was just profoundly shocked by what her son had become. It's then put to her by the counsel for the inquiry that as her son had not left the house since March 2022, he would not be using the weapon for sport, and that she was either extraordinarily naive to think it could be used recreationally or was deliberately lying and minimising it. She replies she was naive and apologises. The inquiry now turns to the day of the attack. We've already heard this. Laetitia was due to start a block of night shifts and had gone upstairs to get some rest when she heard the front door open and close. She went to the window to her other son's bedroom and saw her youngest son walking away from the home. I watched his back as he walked out of the close. So it's reiterated that he hadn't been out the house for just under 2.5 years. I thought he was going to try and be brave by going for a walk. She says she felt nervous for him but did not think he would cause any harm to others. I'm a natural warrior, she says. That's warrior with an O, W-O-R-R-I-E-R. What were you worried about? Not worried he was going to harm anyone, just as a mum, worried he was going to try and go out to do something he hadn't done for some time. Again, that makes sense if you consider her mindset that she just wants to believe good things. Axel, as well as being violent and behaving terribly, particularly to his father, he is also vulnerable, and he was a child. I know we can argue the toss about when someone becomes an adult. Officially it's 18, and he was 6 days, I think, 6 days from his 18th birthday. But he is still a vulnerable person, and I still maintain she would have some justification for believing, as we said, didn't have a backpack with him. Maybe in her mind, she thought maybe he was going to turn a corner that day. He's going to go out on his own for a walk and finally see that he's got to confront the world, not with a knife, but with in terms of fitting into society. I'm speculating, but I'm trying to get inside her head to try and understand her mindset. She admits her focus should have been on the risk her son posed to others after his actions a week before, but says she did not have a clear mind at the time. When asked why she did not inform the police or any other agencies after her son booked a taxi to go to his former school to potentially carry out an attack, she says everything got out of control and we were trying to live like every day to have another day where life is calm. The only thing I can say is that looking now at what he ended up doing, I wish I could have called the police. I didn't think at that moment. That's why I said I've been naive. I didn't think at that time when basically he came back to being calm again. My mind became focusing on him being calm and his way of being, making sure that he ate, and then I just didn't think. She becomes emotional as she tells the inquiry, I hate knives, it makes me ill. She repeatedly denies seeing knife packaging in her house on the day of the attack, despite her fingerprint being found on it. The inquiry heard her son Dion had said his mother had shown him knife packaging on the 29th of July. Please, I'm not lying to you. She says she did not know why her son carried out the attack or why he targeted the particular dance class. And that's the end of her evidence. So you can feel that this is getting very emotionally charged. I think she was just completely out of her depth, as many a parent would be in dealing with this. And again, I'm just speculating, maybe as a God-fearing Christian, she's also questioning, how could God let this happen? She says that she prayed as he left the house that he would have a good walk and that it would be a positive thing for him. Now, we heard earlier that the lawyer for the victims' families was pretty aggressive towards the parents. All three sets of parents, the Kings, the Stankhams and the Aguiars, made statements. I'm just going to read one of them. This is from B.B. King's parents. B.B. King was the 6-year-old, was the youngest of the three victims and was stabbed the most times. Absolutely horrific. The parents of 6-year-old BB King, Lauren and Ben, had this to say. And bear in mind, just to say, this was pretty much straight after the parents had given evidence. So this is, I have to say, a knee-jerk reaction. The last few weeks and months have passed in a blur. We've chosen not to sit and listen to every moment of evidence because from the very beginning it's been painfully clear that BB was failed at every possible turn. We are now left trying to live in a world without her, when it is undeniable that this could have been stopped if just one person had acted properly. This week everything has come to a head as we've learned about the deeply disturbing and shameful evidence relating to the actions of his parents. We are parents too, and we take that role incredibly seriously. As parents, we believe we have a responsibility not just to our own children but to society, to raise them with love, to nurture kindness, and to help them grow into responsible, compassionate adults. Where was that responsibility from his parents? They were absent. They turned away from their duties. Time after time they had opportunities to intervene, to stop this, to protect others. If they'd acted with any real sense of duty, BB, Elsie and Alice would still be here. It's that simple. What we're struggling to comprehend is not just their failure then, but their failure now to acknowledge, to take responsibility, to face up to what they allowed to happen. Now, I'm just going to break in. That's not entirely true because they have acknowledged it. Both of them, the parents, acknowledged it towards the end of their testimonies. Just carrying on here. The excuses, the contradictions, the lack of truth. It's hard to find words, especially when we reflect on the parents we were to BB and the child she was. We've been robbed of seeing her grow up into the beautiful, kind, joyful, selfless girl she was already becoming. A little girl who would have given the world so much. But this isn't just about the actions of one family. This is about the repeated failings of agencies and professionals who should have known better, who did know better, and still did nothing. One of the most devastating aspects is that these failings happened not because there was no warning, but because every concern, every incident was treated as isolated and not significant. Piece by piece, the bigger picture was ignored. There were countless chances to intervene, but instead those in power looked the other way. These were not unavoidable errors. These were systemic failures, and every agency involved must now be held accountable. We want to thank our incredible legal team whose unwavering support has carried us through this process. They've worked tirelessly on our behalf, carefully scrutinising every piece of evidence, ensuring the right questions were asked, and pushing for the truth to be fully revealed. We're also grateful to the inquiry team for handling this process with such diligence and sensitivity. Her name was BB, she was just 6 years old, and she deserved to live. Right, I just want to make a couple of comments. First of all, I am not here at all to have a go at the parents of the 3 girls that were killed. Absolutely not. Let me make that clear. But that is pretty aggressive, and it seems that, based on what her lawyer had said earlier, that perhaps, and I'm not saying that it was written for them, I'm sure they were their words, but I don't know whether the lawyer got involved, perhaps egged them on a little bit. I feel a bit bad saying that, but really the main point is that the 2 parents of Axel and the 3 sets of parents, and of course the parents of the other girls who were injured, who survived. But let's just take for now, because we're looking at the testimonies here in the last couple of days of the inquiry. There's trauma all round. You'll know the title of this podcast when it's coming out, obviously, as you're listening to this, but I think it might be to do with trauma and system failure. And that's not to say that the individuals in the system acted immorally. You know, you want to believe that professionals are doing their job and they care about people, and they probably cared about Axel, and perhaps they even cared too much, in the sense that, as we've said, this pattern has emerged of seeing him more as a victim than a threat, as a vulnerable person, maybe more than a threat. Let's just remember there's enormous trauma, and there was trauma in the 5 years before the attack for his parents, and to some extent his brother, although his brother seems to have been on the outside of it, which is good for him. So the inquiry chairman will be publishing a report. I think it's going to be next year. I imagine it'll be in a few months. This has been a very long podcast. In conclusion, something I mentioned near the beginning of this podcast, I think Axel almost was cursed with a lack of empathy and remorse. There seemed to have been a switch in the brain almost. Now, I mentioned also earlier that it was fairly recently, actually, it just came up in my feed at the interviews with the killers of Jamie Bolger. Like I said, they were around 9 or 10 years old and the victim was 2 years old, so it's not quite the same. But will we get an interview with Axel Rudakubana in prison? What we've heard is that he made these very inappropriate comments, but that was not when he was being questioned. So again, we get this sense of him as quite entitled. It's like, I'm not going to answer questions when you ask me, but I'm going to make comments when I want to make them. Now, my opinion of him, considering the fact that he'd been threatening to kill his father, I knew he was dangerous, but I wonder if he's irredeemable at this point, and prison will have the effect of hardening him for sure. As I've said in the other shows, at the moment he's basically being protected. That's why I'm very sceptical about the idea of him throwing boiling water on a guard, because they are the only people protecting him from taking an absolute hiding. But there's no doubt that when he goes into, it'll be a maximum security, maybe Belmarsh, maybe he'll be moved to more of an open prison situation. You know, he will get either killed or severely maimed, I think, very quickly. They'll be queuing up to do it. And he will know what fear is. And he will know the pain of a knife attack, if it is indeed that. However, I'm trying to end on something positive. There's a small chance that he might use prison to reform and educate himself. He's shown signs in the past that he can self-educate. Apparently he had this genealogy business. He was learning his native Rwandan language. I like to think he was interested in some of things that have happened in history, not just from the violence perspective. If, as I believe, there were knives involved in the killing of Alphonse's family in Rwanda, that would seem either some kind of dreadful irony, or perhaps that contributed to Axel's violent thoughts and his fascination with violence. Because he doesn't seem to have come from a violent and abusive family. Okay, the father slippered his sons when they were naughty. I mean, in my generation, that was pretty normal. Now, I'd rather not leave the last word to Axel effectively, because he's been the subject of these episodes I've done this year. But, of course, I want to wish the victims who survived, these incredible little girls, one of them who was on I think she was slightly older, she was on one of the documentaries giving testimony, and the families of the 3 girls who died, I obviously want to wish them best wishes for the future. I can't believe they'll ever recover from this totally, and they said that themselves. But, for example, the London Marathon run, which we covered in the other episodes, in April this year, 2 of the fathers ran in the London Marathon in aid of projects set up in their daughters' names. That was a poignant day and, I don't know, a ray of hope, perhaps. And hope is a very important thing, and it's essential in the most difficult circumstances. There'll be one more podcast this year, and I think the title is going to be, Is It a Wonderful Life? And it's going to be some questioning of the film It's a Wonderful Life, but it will be also somewhat related to the shows I did in August this year. That will come out either just before Christmas or between Christmas and New Year. If you'd like to help out the show, really it's across my 3 podcasts, Glass Onion on John Lennon, Film Gold, and this one, Life and Life Only. There are links in the show notes to PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee. These are one-off donations. I'm not expecting to become a millionaire. I get very few donations, in fact, so this is mostly a labour of love. But for now, I just hope you've got something out of this episode and the previous ones on a very dark topic. But let's all believe there is hope for the future. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you next month for episode 65. All the best and goodbye.
I wish to thank the Lord Mayor of Liverpool and the staff of the Town Hall for generously hosting this inquiry. I want especially, however, to thank all the core participants for their consistent assistance, almost without exception, during the 9 weeks of these hearings. I am acutely conscious that we imposed considerable demands on you, most particularly to respond at speed to requests for disclosure and witness statements, and then to digest the disclosure from others, sometimes only shortly before the evidence was given in this room. You have responded in an impressively public-spirited manner, thereby enabling us to live up to the expectations of the previous Home Secretary of progressing this inquiry at pace in order to provide early answers for the victims and the wider public. Although we have all had to work hard as a consequence, I remain firmly of the belief that stretching out this process over months and even years tends to lessen the value of inquiries of this kind, and by failing to provide early answers, increases the burden for the victims and their families by perpetuating the lack of an explanation as to how such a cruel and merciless event was able to occur. Given the deep obligation that rests on all of us to provide answers to the victims and their families, our principal responsibility lies to them to provide the best possible explanation as to why and how this terrible event occurred, and to be brave about suggesting the changes that ought to be made to prevent, if we can, a repetition.